Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bold Explorer live reading of J.B. Priestley's English Journey. Hello and welcome along. Another sunny morning here. Not so much of a wind today, so a good one to be out in the garden if you get the chance, or as I probably will try and get out on my doorstep a little bit this morning because I don't have much of a garden, and the garden that I do have at the rear of my house is permanently in the shade, so the only place I can get a little bit of sun is in my front garden, which is about 6 foot wide by 4 foot long, in a Victorian terrace on a reasonably busy road, which is a bit of a shame. Less busy, but still got a bit of traffic. But I may try and sit out there and get a bit of the sunshine. Hello to Jim Hook, hello to Philip Hammond, hello to Rami Boo, and hello to anybody else who is out there and not saying anything. I'm going to start reading in a second. This is chapter 4, I think. Is it still on chapter 4? Probably. Yes, this is chapter 4, called To Coventry, Birmingham and the Black Country. But I'm halfway through, or a little way through, chapter 4, so we've done Coventry. And we're going into Birmingham area. I think we did a bit of Birmingham yesterday. And I'm going to edit out a bit of a diatribe that Monsieur Priestley gets into, which doesn't really advance the story very much. It's interesting from a social history point of view, but it's just his point of view, and he goes on and on and on. And I think it's unnecessary. So I will try and advance the story a little bit, as much as I can. I hope everybody is well and that you're all doing good things. I've already been out this morning and been up to Broadwater to film a video which will come out a bit later on. I've got a couple of books, actually, Worthing and Broadwater books, which I wish I had read and knew all the history of these areas. So as you'll see in the video when I put it up, it is just a vague wandering around. Now you may notice a slight addition in the studio here. Wrong hand. Just there. Very lovely neon sign donated to the cause by lovely Jeff Kellison. Produced by a chap called Simon and sent over. And the camera here doesn't do it justice, unfortunately. Hang on, I wonder if I can just quickly switch to my webcam. How much lead have I got on that? Just to show you. There we are. Lovely, a lovely neon sign. Another one added to the studio. And I suppose, really, when I'm doing Bold Explorer stuff, I should just have that. And when I'm doing Vogue Show stuff, I should just have that. But hey, 'tis what it is. Right, shall we get going? I feel a little bit croaky this morning. I think doing the shows every night, I'm losing my voice a bit. And so, yeah, feeling like I'm clearing my throat every 2 seconds. Morning to Andy and Nature's Beauty. Thank you for coming along. Sarah, good morning to you. Judith, hello. Oh, I thought it was a new little graphic. No, it's not a graphic. It's if I do that, it's genuinely there. Good morning, Les. Nice of you all to pop by. Right, okay, so let's see how far we get. I haven't been able to sit down and pre-read, which I try to normally do, fit in and pre-read so I'm a bit more familiar with the text, but I have read some of it, but some of it I haven't, so we'll see how we go. When I awoke the next morning... Oh, and by the way, although yesterday we were discussing that J.B. Priestley has a northern accent, and I did think about doing this in a northern accent, I thought that might be taking the mickey, so I thought I'd better just stick to my own accent. The newbie ears make me laugh. Well, I'm glad I'm glad they make you laugh, Jeff. Here we go. When I awoke next morning, I felt a tiny but distinct thrill of... Oh, wait a minute. I've read all this. Haven't I read that about the razor blade? I read all that about the razor blade. Wait a minute. Where's the bit I read? I'm confusing myself here. Here we go. Sorry about that. I spent the next day, which was fine and warm, at Bournville. There are several good reasons for doing this. To begin with, I was interested in the manufacture of chocolate, having bought and eaten in my time great quantities of the stuff, and having several times, when I was about 10, tried unsuccessfully to make it myself. Then I wanted to see another highly organised giant works, and Cadbury's was one of the biggest in the country. Again, Cadbury's brothers are renowned as employers of benevolent and paternal kind, and I wanted to see what it is they did. And then again there was Bournville itself, the village. So I went out through dignified Birmingham, messy Birmingham, to planned Birmingham, which had put on autumnal colouring and was looking quite charming. There are a good many things to be said about Bournville, the village. The first is that it has nothing whatever to do with the firm of Cadbury Brothers Limited. This came as a surprise to me, as I imagine it will to many people, for I'd always thought that the firm built the village for its work people on a sort of patriarchal employers scheme. Nothing of the kind. Here are the facts as they are set out in one of Bournville's publications. Morning, Stephen. The Bournville Estate was founded by the late George Cadbury in 1895. In 1879, he and his brother Richard, who were partners in business as cocoa and chocolate manufacturers, moved their works from the centre of industrial Birmingham to what was then an entirely rural area 4 miles from the city. The removal gave George Cadbury an opportunity to put into practice ideas he had long in mind, the result of his contact with working men as a teacher in the early morning adult schools, with which he was connected for over 50 years. He had been led to the conclusion that the root of most social evils lay in bad housing conditions, in which all too many had to live. He himself was fond of country life, and knew its material and spiritual advantages over life in crowded industrial areas. And when the factory was thoroughly established in its new environment, he began to see ways and means of giving more and more people the opportunity to enjoy it. He did not, however, contemplate a scheme only for the benefit of his own workpeople. Rather, his idea was to make what he called a small contribution to the solution of a great problem, the problem of housing as affecting large industrial towns. He bought land in the neighbourhood of the factory and in 1895 began to build Bournville Village. 5 years later, in 1900, the estate covered 330 acres and 300 houses had been built. At that time, in order to secure the perpetuation of his ideas, he handed over the whole property to a body of trusts, the Bournville Village Trust, on behalf of the nation. He thus gave up entirely his financial interest in it and secured that all the profits, for it was set up on a sound commercial basis, should never accrue to any private individual or body, but be devoted to the development of the Bournville Estate and to the promotion of housing reform elsewhere. Excuse me. Got a tickly cough. Now, don't start jumping to conclusions. Thank you. I have no fever, and it's not a continuous one. And I am self-isolating like everybody else. These, then, are the facts. It's worth noticing that this Quaker manufacturer, 50 years ago, talked about something that newspapers and government are just beginning to talk about now, namely bad housing. And he not only talked, but he did something. And what he did has proved very successful. His trust deed was really a housing plan that could be legally enforced. Thus, he laid down that each house was not to occupy more than a quarter of its own site, that factories were not to take up more than a 15th part of any developed area, and that 1/10 of the land, in addition to roads and gardens, should be given up to parks and recreation grounds. Since then, the Trust has really acted like a local authority. It's leased the land to public utility housing societies, which are on a co-partnership basis. These societies, and there are 4 of them, build houses and then rent or sell them to their members. Some experimental bungalows, each made of different material, have been built as a test of costs and durability. There are some tiny bungalows for single persons. There is also a residential club for businesswomen, some of the owners and tenant works for the Cadbury brothers, others from Birmingham, and clerks, artisans, teachers, and so forth. The vital statistics in the booklet that I have before me are of some importance. They are taken from the average of 7 years ending in 1931. Death rate per 1,000, England and Wales, 12-1, Birmingham, 11-6, Bournville, 6-5. Infant mortality per 1... Oh, sorry, I'm saying 12-1. It's 12.1, beg your pardon. Infant mortality... Not that we were that bothered, because this is so long ago. Infant mortality per 1,000 live births. England and Wales, 69. Birmingham, 72. Bournville, much lower, 56. Some years ago, the heights and weights, age for age, of Bournville children and children from other bad areas of Birmingham were compared, and the Bournville children were from 2 or 4 inches taller and between 4 and 9 pounds heavier, and the estate is flourishing. TurboStream says, I live near Bournville. I cycled through Bournville yesterday on my permitted exercise session. Oh, well done. You'll be able to tell me if it resembles anything like this, that it was built 90 years ago. Well, it was not built 90 years ago. Built in 1895, he says here. But this is 1933 visitation. I saw the whole of the village, if it can still be called a village, for now it is the size and population of a small town. Its tree-lined roads, pleasant spaces, villas and gardens are not, of course, the eye-opener they must have been 30 years ago. Nevertheless, they are still infinitely superior to and more sensible than most of the huge new workmen's and artisans' quarters that have recently been built on the edge of many large towns in the Midlands. For example, in many of the estates, no provision whatsoever has been made for recreation, whereas in Bournville you see everywhere recreation grounds and halls. Model yachting is very popular in the district, and it was decided to make another small lake in one of the recently developed areas. A gang of unemployed were brought out from Birmingham to do the digging and draining, and most of these men were not professional navvies at all. For the first day or two they worked with raw and bleeding hands, but they stuck at it, and out of the whole 50 or 60, only 1 dropped out. And now the little lake is there. I saw it myself, ready for the whole fleet of model yachts. I mention this for the benefit of those people, and there are still plenty of them, who think that most unemployed men are unemployable, or if not that, at least not very willing to go very far out of their way to find work. I should like to set some of these people on a long digging job in heavy clay. The village would look prettier if it didn't consist almost entirely of detached and semi-detached small villas. I would prefer houses arranged in small courts and squares. I do not understand the passion for being detached or semi-detached, for you can have gardens just the same if the houses are built in little rows. The most charming houses in England, excluding manors and the like, are built in rows and not detached. And of course, at the very least, charming. Sorry, let me read that again. And so, of course, are the least charming of all the horrors. There is something once fussy and monotonous about a long road in which tiny villas have been sprinkled as if out of a pepper pot. I am sorry Bournville has not been able to experiment more with rows, courts and quadrangles, but I was assured by those who know their tenants greatly prefer that they prefer to live in semi-detached. Within these limits, Bournville has done its work very well. If it has rather too many public halls of religion and too few frivolous meeting places for my taste, after all, I am not one of its tenants, and its real importance is as an example of what can be done by some careful planning and an absence of the jerry builder's motives. It is neither a great firm's private dormitory nor a rich man's toy, but a public enterprise that pays its way. It is one of the small outposts of civilization still ringed round with barbarism. Not quite sure what he means by all of that, but hey-ho. I wonder if it's still like that. I play snooker at a small community club on the Bournville Estate, so it's still run on the ethos of George Cadbury. Isn't that fascinating? That is really interesting. I've never been there. I've passed it on the What is it? The M50. What is the ring road that goes round? Not the M54. The M50. The M50 something, isn't it? That goes round the ring road, the motorway that goes round Birmingham. Right, I'm going to miss out a couple of pages here because he goes on and on and on about work ethic and Cadbury's, and I don't know. It just seemed a little bit of a diatribe, really. And now back to Birmingham in the dusk. I must offer a sore apologies to Messrs. Cadbury and their busy 10,000 good hosts, all of them, and benefactors of the sweet tooth, for using them as pegs, as well as they used me as a man and a brother. So basically that's just because he's sort of highlighted them as a firm of absolute marvellousness, and disparaged other firms, which we just went on and on. Anyway. Let's carry on. Here are two glimpses of Birmingham life. The first is of the public whist drive I attended on Saturday night. It's worth remembering that card games, like almost everything else in this land of social hierarchies, are not without their class distinctions. Whist was once a favourite card game of the upper classes. Now that those people play bridge, auction or contract, whist has found its devotees in a very different set of people, chiefly the small shopkeeping, artisan and working classes. Why don't those people too play bridge, which is, after all, a much better game? We can only guess. Some of them think that bridge is much too complicated for them. On the other hand, many of them play a good game of solo whist, which demands considerable initiative and skill. I've often thought that some of its devices, such as the miserere call, the contract to lose tricks instead of making them, might have been profitably adapted to bridge. Probably a second and weightier reason is that many of these people do not play bridge because they shrink from imitating the wealthier classes and do not want their friends and neighbours to think they're suddenly trying to be posh. After all, there is much more than one kind of snobbery. I nearly said shrubbery then. After all, there is more than one kind of snobbery. We hear a lot about the man who dresses for dinner in Central Africa, but that must not make us forget the existence of a much larger number of men who would die of shame if they were discovered by their acquaintances conveying soup to their mouths above a stiff white shirt. But whatever the reason may be, the fact remains that whist is still the favourite card game of the mass of the English people. The Whist Drive I attended, one of several advertised in the evening paper, was not a private social function, the equivalent of a bridge party, but a public affair, a combined entertainment and gamble run by some astute person for profit, and a very nice thing he must make out of it too. It seemed from the advertisement to be the largest and most swaggering. You paid 2 shillings to compete, but there were many money prizes amounting to £23. I concluded, rightly as it turned out, that a man who promises to part with so much prize money must be fairly certain of getting a great many patrons at 2 shillings a head. The Whist Drive, one of a tri-weekly series, was held in a certain public hall and began at 8:15, so I raced through my dinner and hurried to it. Can you imagine? Do people still... Oh, M42, yes, thanks very much, yes. People still do whist drives? Is that still a thing? 90 years ago, clearly, it was a thing that the masses were playing. The hall was large, austere in colouring and decoration, and lighted in the most uncompromising fashion by unshaded bulbs of high voltage. I love that. Unshaded bulbs of high voltage. It had about as much intimate charm as the average big railway station. I guessed at once that we were in for a formidably businesslike evening. Suspended from the ceiling, about a third of the way down the room, was a large indicator showing 4 suits. The remaining 2/3 of the hall, beyond this indicator, were filled with very small chairs ranged around very small tables, most of them not proper card tables, but mysterious objects covered with what seemed then and afterwards squares of rather dirty blanket material. When you paid your 2 shillings, you were giving a scoring card, either black or red. Mine was black. On this card were the rules: the number of the first table, and the spaces for the numbers of your succeeding tables, the tricks you made, and your totals. There were several hundred people there, and most of them seemed to be regular patrons and to know one another. They were mostly middle-aged, decent working folk, with only a sprinkling of younger men and women. Nearly all the men smoked, and a fair proportion of the women, but there were no ashtrays. I knocked my pipe out on my heel. What the cigarette smokers did, I don't know. After 10 minutes, a man shouted at us through a megaphone, and we all went to our tables. The indicator told us what were trumps by lighting up a gigantic ace of clubs, and we started. There followed what seemed to me to be the most strenuous hours I have ever spent. To begin with, the games were played at tremendous speed, aces being banged on kings without a moment's hesitation. Then there was so much to do. You had to fill in your card and initial the card on each table. If you were the losing man arriving at a new table, and I nearly always was, you had to shuffle the cards before you cut for deal. And 3 times out of 4 it seemed to be my fate to deal. And the packs at each successive table appeared to be older and older and greasier, so that they were about 4 inches thick when they were stacked ready to be cut. Dealing was an unpleasant business. Never in my life, not even in the trenches, have I ever seen dirtier and older packs of cards. It was not pleasant to hold them, even when they showed you a smudge of aces and kings, and it was downright penance to be continually shuffling and dealing them. So what with shuffling, cutting, dealing, playing, gathering tricks up on those bits of blanket, clerky work with the card table and your clerky work with the table card and your own card, changing tables, pushing past enormous fat women, I was kept so busy that after about an hour and a half of it, I was fairly perspiring. And then there was never a minute to lose. The whistle blew as the signal to change tables. The indicator light lit up its new suit of trumps. And if you'd not finished your game, there were people waiting and looking very cross about it. There was practically no time for conversation, hardly time to smile. What conversation there was about the game, if for once it had finished before the whistle blow. 3 times my various partners said to me, "I've got a good backhand," and I could only assent feebly, for I didn't know then, and do not know now, what a good backhand is. As I've not played whist, which is a very different game from bridge, for 20 years, and all these games were run off at colossal speed, I cannot tell you whether people were playing well or badly. I suspect that most of it must have been very perfunctory play, with no nonsense and no finessing in it. My partners were either very big, fat women who bulged over their chairs and tables and sweated good-humouredly, or else little witch-like females with sharp noses, tucked-in mouths and iron spectacles, who held their cards very close to brooches they wore and hardly ever spoke, and they looked very cross, although I don't actually think they were. There were 2 distinct types of men: the solid, hearty chaps who sat bolt upright, puffing out clouds of smoke and banged each card down as if the sheer force would win the trick, and little thin, cunning fellows who sank down and half closed their eyes as they played, like so many nimblelungs. I don't know what a nimblelung is. Niblung? When the whistle blew, after the 12th game, everybody made a rush for the top end of the hall and reappeared a few minutes afterwards, eating fruits, tarts and slabs of cake. This was the interval, and by this time I had quite enough whist driving, but it seemed to me that if one player disappeared, the whole elaborate organisation would be flung into disorder. So I stayed on and played another 12 games, nearly always losing, and so going from table to table, shuffling packs of cards greasier than I had ever seen before, cards that ought to have been thrown in the dustbin months ago. And I found myself in a far corner where the tables were almost touching one another, and enormous women were unable to extricate themselves. And it was sweatier and hotter and smokier than ever. My total score was 155, which was some 30 or 40 below the best. But there was still a chance that I might win a prize for a mystery number, which was drawn by the promoter after he had given the prizes for the winning scores. There was no excitement at all in the end, no cheering, no applause. It was just as brisk and businesslike as the whole evening had been. When the last prize had been awarded, everyone cleared off, rather as if they were leaving a factory and making an end for the night's pleasure. Leaving a factory than making an end of a night's pleasure. I suppose they enjoyed it, which was more than I did. Otherwise they would not regularly attend these functions, as they undoubtedly do, but anything superficial less than a night's pleasure I never did see. Considering that many of them must be engaged all day in work, which must at once be bustling and boring, it's surprising that they should choose this method of passing the evening. I do not believe that it's the card-playing that attracts them there, for nobody enjoyed playing cards at such speed. The secret is the gamble, the chance of winning £2 or £3 for your 2 shillings. The pure social side of the whist was negligible, or at least it seemed to me, though of course I was a stranger and may have missed some quiet fun. At the end, 2 impressions remained with me. It's difficult to find words for them here without appearing unpleasantly patronising, but I must take that risk. First, I was struck by the extraordinary ugliness of most of the people there. Nobody has ever called me handsome, and I do not ask for a very high standard of good looks in other people. It's not that these people lacked regular features, fine figures, bright eyes and so forth. They were, for the most part, downright ugly, really unpleasant to look at. The women were either much too fat or far too thin. The men looked like lopsided oafs, gnomes, goblins. Nearly all of them looked as if life had knocked them into some odd shape, taken the bloom out of their faces, twisted their features and dulled their eyes. A few native races I could have seen had shown better far-off looking specimens of humanity than these. Possibly the people who go to whist drives are among the least handsome of their kind. This would obviously be true of young women, but even when that allowance has been made, that ugliness remains startling. In 20 years' time, I believe it will have gone. But it does not say much for our way of living that it should be there now. The second impression that remained was of a very different character. These people may be ugly to look at, but they were not ugly to be with. In other words, they were surprisingly good-mannered and good-humoured. I never saw one exhibition of bad temper all the evening. There were some obviously much better players than others. There was money at stake, but nevertheless there was never an embarrassing moment. Even the witch-like even the witch-like iron-spectacled little woman never actually was rude to anybody. They were all patient, decent, good-tempered folk, and they compared extremely favourably, startlingly, with well-nurtured people that I've been often seen giving a show of bad manners and egotism at bridge tables, not merely in private, but also in functions such as this. The sharp contrast between the appearance and the manner was very curious. I could make a text out of it, but I will refrain, if only because I want these two impressions to be free from any suspicion of being forced, when actually they were simply what remained with me after an arduous evening. Let's just pause there. That, I have to say, I just found that very funny. But yes, Rami, he's a kind of snob, isn't he? I guess he is. I guess he is. His descriptions there. So the first time I read that, I did laugh out loud. I do like people when they are downright honest and they don't, they don't hold back. I do like it when they say what they mean. It is humorous. It might not be what one would like to think that people would say about each other, but it is quite humorous. Nibelung is a Germanic mythology, a member of the Scandinavian race of dwarfs. Oh, right, okay. Owners of a hoard of gold and magic treasures who were ruled by Nibelung. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. King of Nibelung, Land of Mist. Oh, fantastic. My nan made the tea for the break. My granddad played whist every week in the 1980s. Oh, well, there you are. Isn't that? Thank you, Graham Roffey. That's absolutely fantastic. Turbo Stream says, my grandfather retired to Goring by Sea in the mid-60s. He died in 1979, so I'm enjoying your walks about Worthing, Richard. Thank you very much. There's another one going to Broadwater today. It will be coming out about lunchtime. That was that's interesting though, because it's when he does, well, I think when he captures a certain element of Britishness from the 1930s, that it was just hilarious. Stephen Ruff says no PC in his writing, and I think that's great. I think you shouldn't have personal correctness because it's, as he says in the beginning, this is a true account of on his journey of what he sees and what he thought. And I think from a place of where we are now, looking back, I think that's fantastic. Than to have to look back and look at somebody who's had to just mind what they say so that it doesn't offend anybody. Clearly this is quite offensive. But the people he's talking about then are long gone. Maybe families of them around, but it's obviously not naming any individuals. He can't be much of a ladies' man. No, I think that's probably an accurate description. That's very true. It did make me laugh, though, I have to say. And the thing is, though, when you see some of these old black and white 1950s, 30s Pathé News type things, you can almost see, these working class people out and about, and they are a bit like that. I think when you compare that to now with the Instagram generation and people trying to make themselves look far, far better than they were. I mean, people were just people then, whether they were much too fat or far too thin, whatever they were. The men looked like lopsided oafs, goblins and gnomes. I just think it's hilarious. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Right, we'll try and crack on. The second glimpse of Birmingham, I can barely focus now because I'm laughing too much. The second glimpse of Birmingham comes from the following morning, Sunday. I was awakened in a strangely quiet hotel, quite unlike the weekly place. The spell of an English Sunday is terrifically potent. Even the weather is different. The whole city was blanketed in silence. The streets were wearing their Sunday look. Few people in them, hardly any traffic, but a more than weekday allowance of mist hanging about, as if the country had been given permission to send this bit of autumn weather into town. I ate my customary Sunday morning sausage in an almost entirely empty dining room, where the waiters were beginning to move like church wardens. You had a feeling, obviously shared by the head waiter, the reception clerk down the stairs, the lift attendant, and the two yawning page boys, that a slab of time, like a vast suet pudding, had just been thrust into your hands, that before Monday dawned there would be time enough to write an epic poem on the fall of Jerusalem, or to work out successfully every different kind of patience. But I had not this embarrassing wealth of hours, because I had decided to do something that I had not done for many years, and that was to attend the morning service in a nonconformist chapel. Birmingham has long been one of the chief strongholds of nonconformity, and I felt that I could not pass a Sunday in it without visiting one of its places of worship. I found one about 10 minutes' walk away. It did not belong to the particular denomination that claimed me willy-nilly when I was a boy, but nevertheless my first discovery was this service was almost exactly like the ones I remember from 30 years ago, and that the people taking part in it had not changed a great deal. The chief difference in the congregation was that there were fewer young people in it, and especially young men. I doubt if there were half a dozen men under 35 in the chapel. If there were any boys present, they escaped my eye. There were a few little girls, a sprinkling of older girls and young women, and all the rest of the congregation and the choir were middle-aged. But I suppose that in my chapel-going days there would actually have been twice that number of people at this service, and though there was a certain number of nodding and smiling before and some handshaking after the service, I did not gather the impression that most of these people in this chapel was the centre of their social life, though the notices read out by the minister still suggested that it was. Nevertheless, when one considers that we are generally supposed to have plunged or blundered into a new world since the war, that vast changes are taking place in every department of our lives, the likeness between this service and the ones I remember was astonishing. The organist looked the same and played the same stuff in the same old way. The choir, with its preponderance of rustling females, its one piercing tenor, I spotted him, eyeglasses and grey moustache, its uncertain but hopeless basses, Its trick of turning everything it sang, no matter how thunderous the music, how wildly oriental the words, into something neat and respectable. The rent garments of prophets converted into a pair of dark striped trousers was the familiar choir of my boyhood. The deacons who carried round the collection plates were the immortal deacons of my memories, cashiers and shopkeepers with pointed beards, gold-rimmed spectacles, mourning coats, of a terrific respectability, whose very walk, as they returned the collection plates, obliterated the whole doctrine of original sin. Time had not withered them, though in truth they had always been a little withered. As I watched them, I knew that, old as I am, a ratepayer and a father of children, I had only to go to the following Saturday's tea and concert to see these mysterious beings suddenly secular and waggish over the sandwiches and lemon cheese tarts, to be as startled as I was in 1903. We sang as we always did sing. The minister played as he'd always prayed. The minister prayed as he'd always prayed, not perhaps quite at the same length, but still as if he was sternly addressing some powerful but uncertain portent from the East, who had been talked into this fashion before he knew his own mind. There was, as there has always been, a children's address, which began by the minister, as ever, suddenly putting on a smile so false and sickly that it was frightening, looking down at the little girls in the second row, and then beginning in an odd voice to talk with some determined whimsicality. Sorry. He is making me laugh this morning. He is making me laugh. It's very, very funny observations. I do love it. When I was a little boy, I wiggled in embarrassment at these addresses. I found myself wriggling all over again that morning in Birmingham. The sermon itself was not a bad one, had not changed much. There was the same trick in it of making a tiny and apparently meaningless text, such as, "Then Saul went up," or "These likewise cast lots," and then finding an astonishing number of deeply significant meanings in it, a method that would soon turn any book, History of Rutlandshire or The Commercial Guide to Sweden, into a work of the most profoundest wisdom. The minister, who had the merit, common among nonconformists clergymen, of being able to read and sermonise in a sensible manly fashion, had a long dark face and an arched and restless eyebrows of a comedian. Indeed, his whole face was that of a comic actor, probably French, and humour seemed continually to play over it like a breeze ruffling a pond. Yet the man behind the face had not the glimmer of this comic spirit, and was clearly a very solemn nonconformist clergyman. Somehow he had taken to wearing the wrong face, and that was all. He fascinated me, looking as if he were about to speak some terrific dolatry out of a comedy like La Biche. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. He would announce the hymn and gravely recite its first 4 lines. There was another contrast, however, queerer than between the minister and his face, and I had noticed this as a boy at these services. Then I had taken the general atmosphere of the service and the sect for granted. Now, returning to it after a long absence, I saw how odd it was that these mild Midland folk, spectacled ironmongers, little dressmakers, clerks, young women from the stationer's shop, should come every Sunday morning through the grey, quiet streets and assemble here to wallow in wild Oriental imagery. They stood up in rows, meek-eyed and pink-cheeked, to sing about the blood of a lamb, and after a few little coughs they announced that certain sacred names and symbols induced them in fits of incredible ecstasies. They sat with bent heads listening to accounts of ancient and terribly savage tribal warfare, of the lust and the pride of hook-nosed and raven-bearded chieftains, of sacrifice and butchery on the glaring deserts of the Near East. They chanted in unison their hope of an immortality to be spent in cities built of blazing jewels, with fountains of milk and cascades of honey, where kings played harps while maidens clashed the cymbals. And one could not help wondering what these people would do if they really did find themselves billeted forever in this world of the Eastern religious poets. What, in short, had these sober northern islanders to do with all this Oriental stuff? What did it, and what could it really mean to them? Could anything be less aptly shaped and coloured to match their own lives? If this was the time when their thoughts turned to the creator of the universe, why were they then asked to consider the deep truths of life, to face their consciences, to search their hearts? Why should they be dragged away into this faraway, fantastic world of goats and vines and deserts and smoking sacrifices and tribal kings? It was almost as if instead of the familiar black-coated minister there that had appeared in the pulpit, a whirling dervish had come. Must God, I ask myself, remain forever in Asia? Are these people always to assume that he is still brooding over Babylon? What if he is now brooding over Birmingham? And I will pause there. Whew. That's quite interesting. I love that last bit there. Whereas, people are sitting there reading the Bible, and, no disrespect to anybody who's religious and his Bible, likes the Bible and that sort of thing. But reading the Bible, and as he says, these sober northern folk, well, up north, up there, black country, you know what I mean, are, although that's actually Midland, that's more northern, isn't it? Birmingham, the Birmingham people in Birmingham, are taking their minds into, as he says, the land of goats and the deserts and chieftains and kings in a faraway land. I find that quite fascinating. So it is an insight. I love it. I do love that book. I think it's very interesting. It's quite funny. Philip Cracknell, hello from Hong Kong. Hello to you. Lovely to have you here. Rami Boo says, hello there. Yes, Nature's Beauty. Hello, Philip. Julia, hello, late again. Don't worry, Julia. You probably needed your beauty sleep. Philip Hammond says, good morning to Julia. Julia says, yes, thanks. I had a few hours in the end. Good morning. Philip, lost your spanner, Julia. Ah, yes, that's true. The spanner is on the Vogue show. I'll have to give Julia a spanner. It's a wrench. Sounds a bit nicer than a spanner. Different channel. Oh yes, there we are. Different channel. So anyway. So that's today's little dollop of J.B. Priestley. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope this is helping to get you through this peculiar situation, which is becoming a familiar thing, and that's my worry, is that it's becoming a familiar thing, and we almost accept it, that it becomes a way of life, but it can't possibly become a way of life. That would we have to remember that this is an extraordinary situation, and we will get out of it. We mustn't accept it as a norm, because otherwise it will become the norm. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I will be back this evening at 8 o'clock with the Vogue show. Hopefully some videos and some phone calls, and your chat will be fantastic. In the meantime, I'm going to put together some videos to put out, and I need to go and record my Naked Englishman podcast as well for my patrons. So thank you very much for coming and watching. I will be back again, hopefully 9:30. It does depend. I may shunt this a bit forward, mainly because I try to get out in the mornings to make a video, which then goes out by the time it's edited and everything else. It goes out at lunchtime-ish. And I want to pull out my bicycle. I meant to do this yesterday, but I ran out of time. Pull out my bicycle so that I can go a bit further afield and all of that. Turbo Streams buy off. I'm now to do my allotted exercise, probably go via the chocolate factory. Fantastic! Do let us know if it's similar. to how it was 90 years ago. That is absolutely fantastic. Rami Boo liked it. That's superb. Anyway, take care, and I will see you anon. Till next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.